time to join us today. I know we are coming out of the COVID lockdowns. So the intention today really is that we as the Commission have been hibernating for some time. We felt it appropriate that we should now open this opportunity to update the members of our fourth estate, led by their editors as our key stakeholders, on a number of developments that have taken place in the recent months, and perhaps the Commission had not pronounced or made its position known and clear on some of the issues. And there are 4 key issues that my presentation will address on behalf of the Commission. And then the CEO will then take us into the details after I've taken you through the high level of those issues. And then the CEO will take us through the details of the rest of the issues that the Commission wishes that it should share with yourselves. The first issue relates to the urgent clearing of by-elections backlog. As we know, since February this year, more than 70 countries and territories have postponed elections due to COVID-19. In South Africa, we too have opted to postpone elections, and to date, the Electoral Court has postponed about 96 by-elections at the request of the Commission. And this postponement has enjoyed the full support of all the political parties as our stakeholders. Now, ladies and gentlemen, the rationale followed by the Commission in reaching its determination to postpone the elections was twofold. Firstly, the priority of protecting human lives and ensuring the safety of the voters, the electoral staff, the candidates, the observers, and all other electoral participants was an important one. And secondly, the imposition of the lockdown measures under the National Disaster Management Act, which included restricting the movement and the gathering of the people. And this had and continues to have a direct effect on the ability of all parties and candidates to campaign and to campaign freely and effectively. The Commission therefore resolved that we must fully comply with the regulations and take a responsible leadership role in our society, in ensuring that there is an optimum protection of human life. And the Commission also resolved to resume all the by-election at that time, that all the by-elections will be resumed as soon as the conditions had improved. So recent positive indications of declining infections and rising recovery rates gives us an optimistic disposition as a Commission that we may now be entering a new normal. We hope this will be further complemented by the government's favorable adjustments to the regulations, which should then open the way for resumption of free and fair political activity. According to Section 25 of the Municipal Structures Act, by-elections may not be called 6 months ahead of general municipal elections. That means we need to clear the backlog between now and February, because after February, there can never be other elections until we hold the local government elections. And following, ladies and gentlemen, consultation with the Honorable Minister of Cooperative Governance and Traditional Affairs, Dr. Nkosazana Dlamini-Zuma, we are confident as a Commission that conditions conducive to free and fair electoral activity will soon be accommodated. Thus, as the Commission, we are now drawing up plans for all outstanding by-elections to be held on a single day once consultations with key stakeholders are completed. And the second major consideration is regarding our planning and preparation for the 2021 local government elections. Section 159 of the Constitution, read with Section 24(1) of the Local Government Municipal Structures Act, provides that a term of a municipal council is 5 years. Therefore, elections must take place within 90 days of the expiry of the term. For the 2021 local government election, that 90 days window starts on the 4th of August and ends on the 1st of November 2021. The Electoral Commission is therefore proceeding with its preparations and plans to hold election in this window period in full compliance with our Constitution. And in this regard, we have already begun consultations around our planning with the key stakeholders. Minister Dlamini Zuma, who is the legal authority to proclaim municipal elections, and the Department of Cooperative Governance is among those we are consulting with, together with the Municipal Demarcation Board, who has a relay role between ourselves and them, as well as the key contestants, which is the represented political parties. And we have also plans of engagement with other stakeholders, including the civil society, the traditional leaders, the labor leadership, the business community, and of course, yourselves, ladies and gentlemen. Our fourth estate will also follow in the coming weeks, where we are planning a rollout of continuous engagements about that. Ladies and gentlemen, I think the third consideration or key issue is the issue that took place during the COVID lockdown, that the Constitutional Court ruling on the invalidity of the Act insofar as it requires candidates to only contest national and provincial election as a member of a registered party. In respect of this, following the June ruling, Parliament is now leading the legislative amendment process, and as the Commission, we have offered our full support and assistance from a technical point of view. The Commission is mindful that the electorate, as electoral system adopted by a country, is in fact a matter of significant national interest, which will have a far-reaching implication for its constitutional democracy. For this reason, the Commission believes that the process to review on the electoral system should be a broad-based, inclusive, and ideally a process that will emerge from the national consensus. Thus, as the Commission, we have embarked on an expanded civic and knowledge exchange and education among the stakeholders so as to enrich the choices that they make. The fourth and the last consideration that we wanted to share with you, which is an issue that is also important, that is within this period of COVID, was the issue that relates to the alluded merger of national, provincial, and municipal elections. And I emphasize it is an alluded merger. These two, the Commission considers it to be a matter for Parliament. The Commission is participating in the public discourse around this matter and working with all stakeholders to expand understanding of all potential implications. One obvious implication of synchronizing election is that the term of office of either the national and provincial legislature or all municipal council will have to be lengthened or shortened in order to coordinate them. The Commission is of the view that this would be far more constitutionally sound and preferable for a term of office to be shortened rather than extended. As you know, the Constitution sets specific limits of 5 years for legislatures, but does not provide for an early election under certain circumstances. Thus, the Commission, under well-considered assessment and sound legal advice, is of the view that any proposal to merge elections can only realistically be considered after the next year's municipal elections. And in conclusion, ladies and gentlemen, in the next few months, it will be a period of intense activity within the electoral democracy environment in our country. And as we resume the by-elections, prepare to hold the 6 local government elections and work with Parliament and other stakeholders in amending the current electoral legislative framework. This is a journey which we invite all South Africans to participate and to undertake together so that we can ensure we build on the foundations of the past 25 years and that we can continue to uphold the constitutional principles and values which we fought for. And yourselves as the fourth estate, we acknowledge the critical role that you would be making in this particular process. And ladies and gentlemen, I think this is the overview that we wanted to share with yourselves. And now I would hand over to the program director to invite our CEO for the details behind these particular issues. Thank you very much. Thank you, program director.
Thank you, Chairperson of the Electoral Commission. I beg your pardon, I was muted. I don't want to waste time. I think I'd like to invite our Chief Electoral Officer, Mr. Sai Mamabolo, to present the various issues that we would want to raise for discussion here this morning. Sai, the floor is yours.
Okay. Thank you very much, Program Director, and may I extend greetings to all the participants. You know, I'm not going to repeat the issues that the chairperson has made reference to. I'll deal with those aspects that may require a little bit more elucidation, and so as to create sufficient time at the end for discussions and questions. In terms of the presentation outline, those are the issues that I intend to address. I will not address them to the same level of detail because the chairperson has referenced some of them. Now, in terms of the election timeline, we probably are all aware that an election must be held within 90 days of the expiry of a term. So the current 5-year term of municipal councils expires on the 2nd of August next year. And therefore, an election must happen between the 3rd of August and the 3rd of November. Consultation with the Minister of COGTA has commenced. And that consultation is related to a discussion about the optimum period next year on which an election can be held, rather a date on which that election could be held. And we hope that in the not too distant future, a date will be agreeable between the Commission and the Minister. Noting, of course, that the statutory authority for that determination is in fact the Minister, having consulted the Commission. So you can see that these timelines are predicated on the statutory scheme as it stands. In other words, on the law as it stands. We are preparing on the basis that an election is happening next year and is happening on the basis of the law as it stands. From a program management perspective, we have activated our program management processes. We are working on close to 100 individual projects that are now are underway. Obviously, the milestones are all differentiated and so on, but those are now activated, and the you know, the mechanics of building up to election day have already been activated under that program management that I am referring to. Now, the electoral system, perhaps just two crucial points here. That the decision of the electoral court on the electoral system does not implicate local government. That judgment relates solely to national and provincial elections. So the work that Parliament must undertake has no bearing on the preparations for municipal elections. The current local government system, technically referred to as mixed member proportional, with a ward component of 50% and a proportional component of 50 as well. And is based on closed party list. In other words, a party submits a list. The voter is not able to choose from that list who to vote. So you vote for the party list en masse, and not one where it's open for the voter to decide who on the list to vote. So it's a closed party list. Now, the ward component and the PR component are mixed. They're not running in parallel. They are mixed. What that means is that in calculating the overall proportion of seats to be awarded to each party, you take into account both the ward component as well as the PR component. And that is a requirement, in fact, of a constitutional nature. In terms of section 1573 of the Constitution of the Republic, that whatever system that Parliament decides for municipal councils must in general result in proportionality. So, which is why you take into account both the ward component and the PR component in determining the overall proportions of seats that are won by the participating parties. Now, with respect to the review of the national and provincial electoral system, Parliament has drafted what they call an integrated roadmap, which involves the work that must happen in the executive on the elucidation of policy options, as well as a proposition of a bill to Parliament. We have made an input into that process as the Electoral Commission to say, whichever way Parliament decides eventually, there are certain times by which that process must be complete, so as to enable the preparatory work that we need to undertake to be done. So it's integrated in a sense that it involves the timelines that are relevant for the executive, the timelines that are relevant for Parliament to do its work, and ultimately the work that the IEC must do after the system has been approved. Of course, we have offered to Parliament that we will advise on the technical and operational viability of whichever options are before Parliament. And obviously, it has to be an iterative process so that we don't adopt as a country an electoral system that is impractical to implement. Now, that's the first issue. Second issue really is the Electoral Laws Amendment Bill. As part of the preparations for next year, we've proposed a bill to Parliament, which has been tabled by the Minister of Home Affairs. And the Parliament will begin processing the bill. We are scheduled to appear before the Portfolio Committee on the 9th of October. And there's a joint tagging process of the bill currently. We are proposing the bill as a Section 76 bill, which means provinces must also vote on that bill, because it does affect functions that are exclusive competence of provinces. And the state law advisors are now busy with the final certification of the bill. Now, I do not intend to bore you down with legalese, really, but I just want to point out some key important features that would have a bearing on some operational aspects for next year. So the bill amends 3 pieces of legislation, namely the Electoral Commission Act, the Electoral Act, as well as the Municipal Electoral Act. And it's essentially a technical bill. It is dealing with the technical modalities that must be clarified ahead of the election. So it's not raising major policy issues at this bill. So we do not anticipate that in Parliament there'll be a lot of political disagreements over the substance of the bill, rather that political parties should see it as a way of ironing out teething technical problems. The main objectives really are as follows: to introduce some provisions for authorization of innovation in the electoral process, and I'll talk to that a little later on. But importantly, to align the Electoral Act with the POPI Act regarding the protection of personal information of voters against unreasonable disclosure. Now, I won't go into the Electoral Act because that's for some time in the future, but I just want to deal with the amendments as they relate to the Municipal Electoral Act. We are, currently you could only register a party either nationally or at the municipal level. We are now introducing a registration level for a party at the district level as well as at the provincial level. That will help parties that are not necessarily municipally based, but perhaps are district based, to have a registration at that level and to be able to contest election in a single region. Trying to make things a little easy. When you are a candidate in an election, you've got to sign what we call an acceptance of nomination. Now, if you're using our e-candidate system, you've got to scan back your acceptance of nomination into the system. We are now making a provision that you don't have to necessarily scan it back. The party authorized person must keep a copy. Should the commission at any point wish to have that acceptance of nomination, then it will be incumbent upon the party to supply same. A similar thing for what candidates. Now, a very important amendment is this one, which is in clause 21 of the bill, and that is creating an enabling provision for the commission to prescribe a varied voting procedure for those voters whose name appear on the voters' roll without addresses. What that means essentially is that the Commission will say, if you are on the voters' roll, you don't have an address, you don't automatically lose your right of franchise. But you will have to furnish an address before you vote, and certain tests would have to be undertaken. For instance, is that address within the ward in which you're voting? If it is, then you are entitled to your vote. If not, you are only entitled your PR ward, that type thing. Then there's a procedure for party agents who are available to observe that process, and if desired, then to raise an objection. We've already implemented a similar dispensation for national and provincial elections, so we are extending that dispensation for local government. You will see slightly later on the progress that we have made with the number of people without addresses on the voters' roll. Then we are introducing, or rather making it clearer in section 23, the period from when the Electoral Code of Conduct is applicable. There's been a bit of confusion in the past as to when exactly the Code of Conduct is applicable. So it's binding from the date on which a notice calling an election is published until the date on which the results are declared. I think largely those are the key issues that I wanted to touch on with respect to the bill which is before Parliament. And I'm saying that bill is one of our key preparatory levers for next year's election. Now, on the issue of composite election, just to accentuate a few things that the Chair addressed earlier, that our view is that a decision on whether there should be a composite election, it's a national policy matter, and which must be considered quite carefully. And perhaps a question ought to be asked as to whether should this not even involve the views of the South African citizenry in the determination of whether the country should in fact adopt a way of voting where all spheres of government are elected concurrently. And our view is that we need to avoid synchronizing by extending a term of office. And there are a number of election management considerations that must be brought to bear in the discussion. Firstly, the number of ballots per voter. It's not a simple issue, and in fact, it's quite a weighty issue because one has got to be comfortable that every one of the 26 million voters is capable of handling those resultant number of ballot papers. I'll give you an example. Currently, we're having 2 ballot papers in local government if you are in a metro. If you are in a district, you have 3. Now, if you synchronize local government and national and provincial elections, you add another 2 to the 3, you already have 5 ballot papers per voter. Now, can everyone competently handle that number across the board? It's an issue that's not easy to answer, but one which require consideration. Then there's increased complexity in ballot production. You know, with the municipal election, you are printing close to 70 million ballots within a 10-day period. Now, if you're having composite election, you are adding another 60, so 130 million odd ballots that must be produced within a 10, 14-day period, and ensure that those are packaged correctly per voting station, delivered in right quantities to the right point throughout the electoral value chain. So, which means, therefore, you may not be able to do your ballot production within the 10 days that you have. And the consequence of that is that your period for the activities that underpin the election timetable is immeasurably increased. And in the counting process, you're going to have to prioritize which ballots you count first. You know, are you starting with the national ballot, then provincial, district, and so on? Because you can no longer do it in one fell swoop, and then the security of the ballots comes into play. Where are you going to keep this as you finish national and provincial before you go to municipal? Where do you keep these ballots? Because one of the critical transparency window has been the fact that we count at the station and we don't leave with the ballots until a result at that station is available. So our ability, therefore, to declare an election result within 7 days, it's something that we may have to look at should the national policy point to a need for a composite election. But all these questions that I'm raising are pointing to a bigger policy matter, and that is, if you are to handle this number of ballots and so on and so on, don't you need perhaps a different voting modality, which modality can help you ameliorate some of these challenges of time, challenges of complexity, and challenges of efficiency. But for now, I'm not going to be addressing that matter. It's a discussion for another day. Now, we have 26.4 million people as at the 3rd of September on the voters' roll. We have made good progress with capturing of addresses for voters who did not have same on the voters' roll. Currently, complete addresses, we have 24.8 million complete addresses on the voters' roll. In 2016, just before those elections, that figure of complete addresses was 8.6 million. So in just over 4 years, we've been able to pull that up to 24.8 million. So as we speak today, over 90% of voters on the voters' roll do have a complete address. And by complete address, what we mean are the following: is an address with the following attributes. One, there's a stamp number, house number, street name, and a suburb name. So it's a complete address. In other words, you can put it on Google Maps or whatever. It will point you directly to the spot where that address is. So I think we've been able to position our electoral process to increase the reliability of the voters' roll with respect to that. We still have close to 270,000 of addresses that are potentially incomplete. What we mean by that is that there are some attributes, but they're not complete to form a conventional address. Maybe there's a house number with a suburb, or there's a suburb without a house number, those types of combinations. So we are working at those addresses. We are enriching them with additional data and so on to ensure that we turn them to be complete addresses. Has a REC AS, it's an affirm statement. It's people who live in circumstances where there are no streets, there are no conventional township established requirements and so on. A person who lives under the bridge would say, I am Simon Mamabolo, I live under a bridge at the corner of John Foster and Herefel Avenue. And we use that description to place the person in the relevant segment of the voters roll. We have such 70,000 cases on the voters roll at the moment. So people who still don't have an address, I spoke about how we're going to treat them on election day. But that number, again, it was 8 million in 2016. It has now been reduced to 1.2 million. So there are, as we speak, 1.2 million people still for whom we do not have an address. Those people still retain their constitutional right to vote, but they'll exercise it in a manner that is consistent with the decision of the Constitutional Court, and that is furnish an address or a description of where you live before you vote, and accord political parties an opportunity to determine whether that address in fact places them in the right component of the voters' roll. Now, if you look at that represented in a bar chart, you'll see that we have 26.4 million people on a voters' roll, and of that, 24.8 million do have a complete address, and people without an address on the voters' roll, it's 1.2. The other two are not noteworthy, really, the moment. And we in this slide, I'm trying to indicate the provincial distribution of people without addresses on the voters' roll. You'll see that the total obviously is 1.2 million, of which 418 are, about 33% are in Gauteng, followed by KwaZulu-Natal. So we have our work cut out in the province of Gauteng to deal with it. And you can look, we'll avail this, you can look at the distribution of this information, persons with no addresses, by way of municipality and the provinces. You can see that in the Northern Cape and the Western Cape, the majority of municipalities have between 1% and 3% of people without addresses, and large portions of Limpopo and KZN. Your bigger issues are in the far northeastern part in Mpumalanga, as well as the Free State and Gauteng. So you can look at that at your leisure. Complete addresses is almost an inverse of the earlier slide that I've shown to you. What is the provincial distribution of complete addresses on the voters' roll? I won't belabor that. Gauteng here leads with 5.8, followed by KZN at 5.2, and then Eastern Cape at 3.1, and the Western Cape at 3 million. Now, let's come to by-elections. with the onset of the pandemic, we've asked the Electoral Court to extend the period within which a by-election must be held. Ordinarily, a by-election must be held within 90 days. It has been impossible in the COVID context, and therefore we have had to go through a judicial process to authorize the Commission to hold this by-election outside of the statutory prescribed 90-day period. And there's currently 111 wards which now need to be filled. We are in the final stages of consultation with political parties, and within the next few days we should be able to make an announcement as to when these by-elections will be conducted. The idea, though, is that we have one day where we all deal with them, so that almost a mini election, really, so that we are now back in compliance with the statutory provisions. This list, I think, it's important that we state upfront, excludes the Tshwane Council, because, as you know, there are two litigation processes that are currently underway. One is in the Supreme Court of Appeal, where one party is challenging the execution order issued in terms of Section 18 of the Superior Courts Act. And the other is the main appeal against the decision of the Gauteng High Court on setting aside, reviewing and setting aside of the dissolution of the municipality. So, as an electoral commission, we'll align with whichever way the judicial forums of the country determine. If they say a by-election must be held, we will schedule it accordingly. Now, I think the second last issue is the issue around party funding. You are aware that the president assented to the bill last year, so it's now an act. And following the assent by the president, we drafted regulations and consulted on same. And during that period of consultation, we received over 4,000 written submissions. And we then had a public hearing. We have processed all the submissions, both oral, given at the public hearing, as well as the written ones. And we do have ready a final regulation, so to speak. However, we are unable to publish same because there is no determined promulgation date. And as you may be aware, the president is the person who can promulgate the commencement date for the for party funding. On our side, we have built an application which members of the public, corporate, as well as political parties can use to disclose funding that has been made available to political parties. We are in the process of training political parties in the use of that business application. But basically all we're saying is that as the Electoral Commission, we believe we've done all that we needed to do to be ready for the commencement date of party funding. Of course, this is a statutory function that has been placed at our door. I think we went into it crying whilst they not carry us into it by Parliament, but we have done all that which we ought to be doing. A last point on this is that the party funding framework will undoubtedly be affected by the choice of electoral system that is eventually made. For instance, currently, if you have representation in parliament, there is a public funding that you receive post-elections. That framework has to change to accommodate independents if they are elected into either the National Assembly or the provincial legislature. Now, in conclusion, just a few things that we are working on by way of innovation. We are in advanced stages of acquiring a voter management device. You know the legendary ZipZip machine. It has come to its useful life, and as a result, it needs to be replaced. So the new voter management devices, I prefer to call them COVID machines, but be that as it may, will be used for voter registration. They'll be able to capture an address or place of residence at the point of interaction with the voter. So we won't have to fill in an REC1 form and have it captured at some other later stage. So we will be in a position to capture your address when you visit a voting station. We'll be able, with the use of these voter management devices, to verify your address against the ward boundaries. And on election day, we will use the same machine as an online voter's roll to check whether you've not visited other voting stations and so on. Again, we are revamping our public website to allow for easy navigation and so on, making it a bit more accessible and a bit user-friendly. We're working on an app which the members of the public can use to report issues of disinformation, especially on social media. We are introducing e-learning. We're converting module 1 and 2, and that is part of the series of modules that we take through electoral stuff. So we're taking that into the e-learning platform. And we are introducing an internal dashboard to track our projects against performance and election readiness. And some components of this dashboard will be available on the website, so that even members of the public, yourselves, could just check what is our extent of readiness in preparation for the elections. Chair of the session, thank you very much.
Thank you, Sai, and thank you for that briefing. I think there are many questions that we can expect. You and the chair will fill these questions. I am going to facilitate them. We have received a few online. They have been dealt with, and I think the people that were raising these questions will have noted that we have dealt with them. Now is the time to deal with the questions that may be very specific to the issues that you have raised. I would like to be assisted. I know that behind this technology, there are many people that are working with us to receive these questions. Chairperson, I'd like you to prepare you to be unmuted just in case. I would like to then ask those that are working with us online to open up the space for questions. The floor is now open for questions. Perhaps to start us up, there are a number of questions that have come. There is a magazine called Mag News. The editor has asked a number of questions, and I think those are questions that are best dealt with directly with them. They relate to ratepayers and what ratepayers can do and cannot do. Some of those are questions that are just outside of the Electoral Commission when I look at them, but we will certainly be dealing with them online. There are a number of questions that have now come. There was a question about disinformation. As regards disinformation, will the IEC be using the Real 411 platform? That's the question perhaps that we should deal with. The second question is on composite elections, and it is asked whether this is a national policy matter. Are we suggesting that a referendum should be held? Perhaps you might want to clarify those two questions as we begin, my panelists, chairperson and the chief electoral officer.
Thank you, Program Director, and thank you for the questions that have been asked. From the presentation one has made, the issue of composite elections, we are just sharing the information. We are not necessarily advocating for any position. The Parliament would make its considered view as to how it moves on that matter. What we are doing is we're just broadening the discourse and the considerations that these are the matters that will have to be factored before any decision is made. But as the Commission, no, we are not taking an advocacy position in one direction or another. We're just flagging the issues that relate to that. And I'll leave the next question to the CEO.
Sai, I hope you've had your water. There's a question about disinformation and whether the IEC will be using Real 411 platform. Whilst you have that, there's another question to check if you have identified any potential conflict hotspots yet. And I will bring some more questions as I receive them.
Yeah, thanks. I think what the IEC is saying is that there will be a facility for members of the public to report incidents of disinformation. That facility, whether it's by way of partnership or it's internally developed, the mechanics around those things are being ironed out. A facility will nonetheless be available for members of the public. The hotspots, yes, there are areas that are known to us that have historically presented challenges during electoral events. And most of those are related with two aspects. One, boundary disputes, be they provincial boundaries or municipal boundaries, outer municipal boundaries. And then the second category of those are related to service delivery protests. The latter lot are very difficult to predict because one day is this ward, the next day it's a different ward, and so on. Now, it's important that we are upfront with the fact that the Municipal Demarcation Board, which is the authority responsible for the determination of municipal boundaries and ward boundaries, has not looked at the outer municipal boundaries in preparation of these elections. They have only looked at the wards, or rather, they are currently looking at the wards. So those communities who may be aggrieved by the nature and extent of their municipal boundary will, in all likelihood, so remain disaffected and we know some of them. Thanks. Seems we've lost the chairperson. Where is it?
Perhaps, ladies and gentlemen, we could still proceed. See, if we go into the question and answers that are in the system, perhaps starting from the bottom, you could just pick some of those questions that are appearing there, starting from the bottom, going up, just to make up for the time until the program director is back.
Okay, yeah, I've seen a question about the number of vacancies. I think there's a bit of confusion. The chairperson was referring to the number of countries who elected to postpone the elections throughout the world. What I was talking about are the number of wards that we have in the country. And I want to confirm that we're having 111 minus 20. And in the 111 is included the dissolved municipality of Pokwane in the Northern Cape. And then there's a second issue, whether we will share the presentation with SANEF. Yes, we will make that available to the colleagues at SANEF. So I think those are the ones that I've picked up. But if there are others that the team has picked up, we are available still to answer.
Thank you, CEO. I see now the program director is back with us, and as soon as he unmutes himself, we then can hand over to him. Thank you, sir.
I thank you, Chairperson and CEO. I was challenged with technology here. Thank you very much. There are a few questions that I thought were asked. There was a question being asked about technology from Mahlatsi. And Mahlatsi, I have reconnected because I lost the connection for a moment. You wanted to know something about whether we are checking technology. I've lost that question, but we'll come to it. The next question, whilst I'm looking at that one, got it. Have you evaluated an electronic voting system for a composite election? Let's write that down. Next question is from Stephen Lang. It says, is there a timeline for electronic voting, perhaps using the new management device? Then I have a question. What plans do you have in place around training of journalists? SANEF is hoping to run a number of workshops. We would like to have the IEC to play a key role. I relish these questions, but I leave them to the Chief Electoral Officer and the Chairperson to deal with them. Thank you very much. Whilst you're looking at this, I'll bring you more questions.
Yeah, I think they're for the CEO.
Okay. No, thanks. We've been seized with the topic of e-voting for an extended period of time. we've done a scan of the options that you find in most jurisdictions in the world. We went into conference with political parties about what options are available when one looks at the various modalities of electronic voting throughout the world. We have also done a survey with at least the political parties which are in the National Party Liaison Committee, and the feedback has not been very positive on that front from the political parties. Thirdly, during last year's elections in November, we went together with all parties in the National Assembly to Namibia to go see what they offer in electronic voting. We, as the IEC, had wanted to have a pilot run in the by-election and perhaps in certain districts during next year's election, so that we can use the experience from that pilot to plan for perhaps a rollout in 2024. However, our submission for funding has not yielded a positive outcome, and therefore even the possibility of a pilot at this stage, given the perilous state of public finances, appear not possible. Now, that is the report that we can give on that question. But let's say the following things, because electronic voting appear to mean different things for different people. And we have to get to a point where we narrow the definition of electronic voting for the South African context. And some rough ideas, these are not commission determined decisions, but rough ideas. It is possible to have an electronic voting machine which operates at the voting station and is not online. And because it's not online, it reduces your risk of hacking an attack. That's one. Two, it is also possible to have a voter verifiable audit trail, because human nature wants confirmation that the thing that the machine does, it's that which you have opted for. And now a voter verifiable audit trail means when you choose, you go there, the machine is activated, you press the option which you want to vote for. There's a printout of your choice. You confirm the choice. It asks you, is this your choice? You confirm, then there's a printout, and that printout can be validated with a stamp and placed into a ballot box. For validation purposes, you could then have a certain number of pre-selected or randomly selected voting station who will count those voter verifiable audit trails and compare those against the results from the machine. And once that process is done, then you can upload your results in the normal way. But this thing will require huge public investment. Initially, there's going to be a huge public investment required to purchase all these things in sufficient quantity, because you can't have just one machine at the voting station. You need to have multiple streams to be able to allow for queues to move without creating frustration and so on. So those are some of the ideas. These are some of the things that are emerging from the research that we are doing, and so on. As to when will South Africa have the money to make this investment, frankly, I don't know. But the commission itself is keen to engage the subject matter in a serious way. Training for journalists, yes, we are available. We have always partnered with SANEF and other media houses and other media houses to provide the training that may be necessary. Thanks, Chair.
I suggest you get refreshments. There are a few tough questions. I realize the job of Chief Electoral Officer is not so easy, but I want to let this question go to the chairperson. It comes from Adrian Basson. He wants to know, in fact, he makes a statement first by saying that the amendment of the Electoral Act is a major policy development for South Africa that could dramatically influence our political landscape. And then he asks, what was the IEC's input on this to Parliament? Essentially, Adrian is saying, what advice are we giving Parliament as the Electoral Commission in relation to the imminent amendment to the Electoral Act following the Constitutional Court ruling? And then he also asks, what is the work that is cut out for us as the Electoral Commission to educate the public about these changes? Chair, may I leave that with you for a moment?
Thank you, Commissioner, Program Director. Yeah, this is a very good question and an important one indeed. As the Commission, immediately after the judgment was made by the Concord, we were in principle very clear that we as a Commission, we now will abide. And we then communicated with Parliament and indicated as such. Among the things then we offered and we put on the table was that to the extent that issues that the Parliament has to deal with, we don't want to confuse the public that we are overreaching in terms of our role and responsibility. Parliament makes the laws. But in the process of making the laws, we as an institution, we have a repository of skills and competency that should then be made available or be put at the disposal of Parliament so that Parliament is enriched as well as supported by us as an institution in order for them to meet their obligation as the ruling made it clear. And in that process, we have now been seized with engagement with Parliament. And among the things that we actually have done, not only for Parliament, but also we're taking that to the public, is the issue of what are the options that are on the table around the political systems. So we've prepared and packaged a comprehensive list, and that information can be shared with yourselves. There's a comprehensive list of the options and scenarios that these are the systems that prevailed from a comparative critique and analysis. Now, the Commission is very careful that it does not recommend a particular system. It creates a platform of broadening the knowledge and the understanding of what entails issues of political systems, and in a technocratic sense, will also avail a technical team that, as the CEO also pointed out, that will then be available continuously to Parliament until the process is completed, to provide them all the necessary technical information about the system, the electoral systems, and its applicability into our environment. As a Commission, we do not have a system that we say it's our preferred system. We will abide with the elected representatives' pronouncements once the matter has been exhausted. And regarding broader political education, a part of the mandate of the Commission is that of civic education and democracy education and development. We plan to strengthen, within the limited resources from our fiscus, we plan to strengthen the programs that should at least give us a minimum critical mass of understanding of the issues that are before the electorate, which would include aspects of the amendment, but it goes beyond that. It will also be whatever systems would have been what you call identified. It would be for the Commission to educate the citizenry and the voters as to the voting approach and what are the implications. I mean, earlier on, the CEO was also illustrating, if, for example, a composite election is done, then it would then mean the Commission must go out and then teach the people that you now have 5 or more ballots in your voting station. And we are also exploring other innovative approaches, and some of them would also entail us entering into partnerships like we've never done before with yourselves as the members of the media. Among these things is for us to be in a position that we need to now shift the emphasis on the physical communication engagements, workshops, and all those things. The period of COVID has told us that we must embrace technology even more. So we are exploring with our communication teams to look into how then we could actually embrace technology for technology to enhance our communication and reach to the masses. And among the options that we are exploring now is the issue of a mobile communication capability, where we would be in a position that we can have live, just-in-time broadcasts throughout our civic education engagements, as well as various other communication engagement with the various stakeholders. So we are looking into this space, and we will be announcing details of new and innovative initiatives that would be part of our stakeholder engagement and communications. Thank you, Program Director.
Thank you, Chair. I'm going to go back to the Chief Electoral Officer. Quite a few very key questions. The first one, it's whether the IEC is ready and well capacitated to monitor new regulations regarding the funding of political parties. The specific question is whether it will take on extra staff for this task, or it is, as we speak, well capacitated. That comes from Karian Duplessis. And I imagine, CEO, this would be your question. Mahlatsi wants to know if we have looked at electronic voting. I know you have spoken about that a little bit. Perhaps you just want to stress on that issue. Angie Kapelianis asks a very interesting question. She says, what's the worst case scenario for the IEC and the country regarding next year's local government elections with a COVID-19 global pandemic continuing? I hope not, Angie, but those that are on the panel will answer this in very specific terms. I leave this with you, CEO, for a moment.
Thanks, Chair. With respect to the last question, the worst case scenario is that we are back at level 5 in a month when an election must be held, in terms of the risk adjusted strategy. And in those circumstances, a free and fair election may prove to be impossible. And in that circumstance, or perhaps let me elucidate this by saying, it would then mean parties are not able to have unfettered access to voters, so candidates can't campaign. We may not be able to have people come out to voting stations, and so on. So on that evidence, the Commission may then have to be forced to consider approaching the Electoral Court for relief, which relief may include moving them out until circumstances are such that possibilities of free and fair election are re-enacted. So that's what it would mean if we were to go back to level 5 or even level 4. Now, with respect to the question on plans for protection of personal information, I think we did indicate in the presentation that we are introducing a requirement to redact certain information on the voter's roll in the version that goes to political parties, so as to minimize the unreasonable disclosure of personal information of people. This is a matter on which we have consulted with the National Party Liaison Committee as well as the information regulator. So in that sense, we were trying really to reduce the unnecessary disclosure of information. And of course, we've got to be mindful that this needs to be balanced against the decisions of the Constitutional Court on the address. The court has made it clear that the voter's roll must have an address for purposes of campaigning and checking whether the voter's roll is in fact correct. So the proposition at the moment is to redact certain information from the ID number so that it is not a 13-digit number, but at least parties are able still to verify. Then there's a question on the penalties arising from transgressions to the Electoral Code of Conduct. The Electoral Code of Conduct provides for a number of penalties. There could be a fine to a maximum of 200,000. A party could be deregistered. Votes for parties could be reduced in part or completely. Candidates may be disqualified, and so on and so on and so on. So as matters stand, the penalties are severe. As matters stand, the penalties are severe. A greater challenge that we have is matters being placed before the Electoral Court for adjudication. because I think there's a mistaken belief that those sanctions are meted out by the IEC. It is not so. The sanctions are meted out by the Electoral Code. So in other words, if there's a transgression and that there are facts that establishes that transgression, that must on application be brought before the Electoral Court for consideration and adjudication. And once the court is satisfied that indeed a transgression has happened, then it can exercise its jurisdiction to decide what penalty to mete out. Then there's a question on the by-elections and Makana. I think we've provided the detail. Makana is not part of the list because there are still judicial processes that are currently underway. As soon as those are clarified, we will either include it or exclude it. Then party funding, we have started the recruitment processes. Currently, there's a CE for the unit and some administrative support for him. And as the act gets implemented, I think we'll grow it organically. We'll grow it organically. We have to work with other agencies. The success is not going to be so much on the extent of people or the number of people employed, but rather how well we work with other institutions, banks, the Financial Intelligence Center, SARS, and related institutions. And of course, discussions with those institutions have been held, and cooperation terms are being agreed. So that's really how the thing will work out.
Thank you, CEO and Chairperson. We have some more questions. Some of those you have dealt with, CEO, in relation to a question by Llewellyn Prince. They want to know what is the plan to hold, to catch up with all the outstanding by-elections. I think the CEO has indicated that we are looking at possibly. We are consulting and will possibly be making announcements once consultations have taken place on a possible date sometime in November or early December. But that really is the plan, and the plan would include holding all of them, as I understood you. There is a question, of course, that Isaac Minar was asking, what do we do in relation to disclosure of information? On that score, I think the CEO has answered. We just want to thank you, Isaac, for indicating as well in that question that tomorrow there is a launch of the report on proactive disclosure of information and elections in South Africa. We will make an effort to follow that. There was a question from Zukiswa about community media. And I'm sure, CEO, you would want to reassure community media that they play a very key role in local government elections, and that they wanted to know whether there would be training for them as well in these elections. The question that we also see here, it's from Temba Sipotukele. He says, has the IEC taken into consideration that next year's local government elections might take place during rainy seasons, which might have an impact on voting day? I'm almost certain that Chairperson, you would want to speak to Temba on this one.
Thank you, Program Director. I think it's important to know that we as the Commission have to work with the given. And the given is the prescribed timetable or time frame in law as to when elections must take place. And then we have to plan accordingly. In a given year, there perhaps are very few windows where you are not affected by the weather. When we have elections in the period of April to July or so, the winter has an impact on the work of the Commission. And when you come into spring, the different weather conditions prevail, which is the rainy season. But interestingly, if it is in the winter, we also have a Mediterranean climate in the country. So geographically speaking, the whole western board from the Eastern Cape into the Eastern Cape into the Western Cape, you have rainy season in particular in Western Cape. We work within those circumstances. So I think it's not easy to avoid those factors. But over and above that, we also have issues of infrastructure availability. As a country, we are dependent and rely on the infrastructure that's schools and so on. And we have to also work around and see how we balance with schools, because certain periods may not be favorable to schools because it might be in the peak of their exams and so on and so forth. Yes, I think Themba, we have to roll with the punches, if I may put it in a what we call metaphoric sense. Thank you.
I think we are now pressed for time. In fact, we are a minute or two just over our time. I know that our partners in SANEF are committed and they do have time constraints. I want to give you a minute each to wrap your thoughts. Anything that you wanted to have raised and you didn't, you're now reflecting. I'll start with you, Chairperson, and then I come to you, Chief Electoral Officer.
Thank you, Program Director. I think the most important part is that this is a forum that is part of the ongoing partnership between the Electoral Commission and the members of the Fourth Estate. Incidentally, I'm asking myself, who is actually a Fourth Estate? Is it the Chapter 9, 10 institutions or the media? But it's something that we can talk about over coffee one day. But it's an important relationship that we, as the Commission, we value. It is important that it is understood in that context by ourselves that we have a collective responsibility to make sure that the democracy that this country enjoys is never lost to us or compromised. And we rely on the partnership with yourselves as the heads of the media, as well as the journalists, to actually keep us on our toes, but at the same time enhance our work in terms of the understanding of the issues that we need to take into consideration in our plans. And lastly, for us to work together in partnership in making sure that we keep our citizenry and we keep our society vigilant about its democracy, conversant and competent about the democracy and the electoral democracy issues that are on the table. And one is, as one has said earlier on, is that I'm looking forward to see us coming up with innovative initiatives now that relate to communications, electronic and mobile communication activities, where we can actually have a continuous broadcast throughout the year on democracy issues between ourselves and yourselves as the custodian of our communication and media. Thank you, Program Director, and thank you, ladies and gentlemen.
Thank you, Chair. Sai?
Yeah, no, just in conclusion, it is clear that we have our work cut out. The onset of the COVID pandemic has complicated many aspects of the electoral program. So we need to do a little more than we have historically done to achieve at least the same level of efficiency within the electoral program. Now, speaking on behalf of my colleagues in the provinces here at head office, and as well as on the ground in the municipalities, we'll spare no effort to ensure that we give South Africa yet another a democratic event, electoral event that we can all be proud of. Thanks.
Thank you very much. You know, work like this takes a whole lot of people to put together. There are many people to thank indeed this morning. You may have seen the chairperson of the Electoral Commission and the chief electoral officer, but there are many, many people. We want to thank SANEF for your partnership. It's always great. You know, we differ sometimes on issues. We hold different views. We never fight about these things. We always acknowledge that we have to report and inform. And this is it's a very exemplary thing. We will always rely on you. We'll always speak to you openly. We'll engage as we ought to. And we trust that you find that engagement reciprocal. Thank you indeed for coming to the party in the way that you have done this morning. We want to thank all editors that have taken your time from the busy schedules that you have to be here and to ask these questions. I know that there are a few more that you may have. We are here. We will not run away, and we will answer all the questions that you have. To all of the media houses you represent, thank you indeed. We know we can rely on you to inform the South African public and the world at large about the work we do as this nation. There are many people that have worked behind the scenes. When I got disconnected for a moment, you should have seen there were people around me who were connecting. Thank you very much. The technical team, you are amazing. People never get to see you, and yet you do this work. I'm grateful. On behalf of the Electoral Commission and SANEF, thank you for carrying that technical work until or thus far. There are many colleagues and staff members of the Electoral Commission without whom this work would not have been complete. Thank you indeed. Thank you. You are a great team. It's just a wonderful thing to watch you in action. For me, this is a very key thing we do. Whenever we get involved with stakeholders, we thank you for the opportunity. When we started this, in my heart, I was longing for just one thing. And it's captured very well by Helen Keller. And I want to quote her. She says, "I long to accomplish a great and noble task, but it is my chief duty to accomplish small tasks as if they were great and noble." I close that quote. It is exactly what it feels this morning. I want to salute all of you and thank you for staying the course with us this morning. We have come to the end, and we see you next.
The very prominent Republican.
Thank you.